Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. In today's episode we're going to look at something that's become quite popular in photography and film recently, which is colorizing old images. Now, colorizing black and white images has been done throughout time. It used to be done by hand painting the actual photograph, and as we've got into the digital age it's become easier to do. But of late there's been quite a few very realistic looking colorized images. In film recently, Peter Jackson, the director, took a bunch of images from World War One, a bunch of footage, and colorized them, and the results were stunning. So what we're going to do today is we're going to show you how you can go from an old black and white photo like this and turn it into something like this, a more realistic colorized version of the original image. Let's get rid of the color image there. This is quite an involved process, so there's a lot of steps involved, and I'll take you through it as simply as I possibly can. Now, to start off with, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this image. This is actually a photograph of my grandmother. When I knew my grandmother, she was already an old lady. She was actually quite ill and in a wheelchair. So we've come across this photograph, which we believe was taken in the late 1920s, early 1930s, of her as possibly late teens, early 20s. And as you can see, at the time, she was a very stylish woman. And I thought it would be really nice to use this image as a basis to try and colorize. So starting off with, one of the first things we want to try and do is get the skin tones correct. Now, getting the skin tones correct just by painting on colors always looks fake and never looks real. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a reference image, and as is fitting, I have a reference image here of me, and seeing as the two of us are related, there's a good chance that our skin tones were probably fairly close. So what I'm going to do first off, I've got this reference image here. I've got it down quite small, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to drag that into this image. So there we go. I'll now get rid of that one. So now what we've got here is the image of me on top of the black and white of my grandmother. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my skin tones as a reference point to make a palette that we can use on the black and white photo. So to start off with, I'm actually going to shrink my image down ever so slightly so we can see what we're doing. Right. Now that's shrunk down, what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on this image. So using the zoom tool, just going to close in. And now we're going to make a palette of the colors from my skin. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come across to our toolbar here, and we're going to pick the eyedropper tool. Just below the crop tool is the eyedropper tool. You can press I on your keyboard to bring up the eyedropper tool. Now before we start using the eyedropper tool, we've got to look at this area at the top here. Normally it will be set to point sample, and what that'll do is wherever you place the eyedropper tool will just sample 1 pixel's worth of image. But we don't want that. What we're looking for is a more average representation of the colors of the skin. So in the drop down menu you've got a couple of choices. You've got 3x3, 5x5, 11x5. We're going to pick 5x5. So that's going to pick a 5x5 pixel area that the sampler is going to sample the colors from. So let's start off and let's look for the darkest area on my skin, which is probably down here by the side of the nose. So we'll click the eyedropper on there. And you can see now over here in our color swatches, the foreground color has changed to that color. So we're going to pick a brush, bring the brush size up. You can adjust the brush size by using the square brackets on your keyboard to make it larger or smaller. And I'm just going to paint a stripe of that darker color. Okay, now we're going to go back to our eyedropper tool, and let's go for sort of the next darkest area, which is probably around here on my cheek. Somewhere around there is going to be the next darkest shade. So back to our brush tool, so B on the keyboard to bring the brush tool up, and I'm now going to paint that just above the first sample we took. And now I'm going to continue doing that across the photo from dark to light. Now it's entirely up to you how many different shades you want to go for. 3, 4, 5 is perfectly acceptable. That'll work perfectly well. So let's now go for the lightest area, and I think the lightest area is probably somewhere either here. That's a highlight, so we'll go somewhere on my nose, somewhere like that. B to bring up the brush tool, and let's do the lightest area there. And again, we'll just keep doing this until we get a good range of tones from the skin. We'll do one more just for luck. Something around there. As you can see, that one's actually not that far off of the previous one. Okay, so now what we've done is we've made a colour palette of the different tones in my skin. Just to make things easier for yourself, I'm now going to use the marquee tool. So M on your keyboard, I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool and just make a clean square of those different tones, different skin tones. Press Ctrl J on my keyboard, and that's now given us, if I turn off the middle layer there, we now have a little colour palette that we can start to use to give us our skin tones. So I'm going to move that out of the way. Let's get rid of, we now don't need our reference image, so we're going to get rid of that layer there, throw that in the bin. Highlight our palette, V on the keyboard. I'm just going to move it to one side there so we can see it. Okay, so that's stage one. We now have a reference for skin tones. Now what I want to do here is use a gradient map to give us the skin tones that we're looking for. So we're going to, back on the background layer, we're going to keep our palette as the top layer all the way through this. So whatever we do, we've got to try and make sure that our palette is at the top layer. This will become obvious later on, as you see, as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do is add what's called a gradient map. So we come down to the bottom of our palette here, and our adjustment layers is this little black and white circle. And right at the bottom here, we have gradient map. Now instantly, what the gradient map is going to do is going to pick whatever was the foreground colour and white as our gradient. And you can see here that it's basically picked whatever the last colour I sampled was, going through to white to be the gradient. And as you can see, that's not done the skin any favours. That doesn't look realistic. Just for a second, I'm going to click that out. Now the next step is quite important. On our gradient map layer here, Photoshop has immediately highlighted the layer mask. We need to click on the actual gradient map thumbnail itself, because otherwise we're not going to be able to sample the images. It will stop us sampling the images. So if you try and do the next step and it's not working, this is where you need to adjust it. You need to come from the layer mask onto the actual gradient map icon there. So double click on that, and that reopens up our gradient map. Okay, so now we've got our bar for our gradient map. If you just click on your bar for the gradient map, it's now going to open up what your range of colours are. So for a start, let's go to our darkest end. This end is our darks, this end is our lights. So we're going to click on this box at the end here, and that now gives us an option to set that colour. So click on the colour, and if we come to into our image, you can now see that we have the eyedropper colour. So we go to our darkest colour in our colour palette and click that. And that has now set the dark point to be our darkest colour from our colour palette. Click OK. Now we're going to do the same with the light end. So we click on the white box there, click on colour. As we come in, we have our eyedropper, and we're going to go to our lightest colour on our palette here. There. So now what we've done is we've set a gradient that goes from our darkest colour on the palette here to our lightest colour on the palette at this end. But we have got 4 more shades. So what we're going to do is, if you come along this line here, your little finger arrow pops up and you can click on there, and that's going to add another stop point. Now immediately it's copied the lightest color, but we don't want that. What we want to do is click on that, choose our color, come back in, and we'll choose the next one in line. And we're going to continue doing that across the color palettes we have here. So let's add another one in this end. And that's going to be our second lightest. And we have one more which we'll add just around the center there. Click OK, and that will be our center one. Click OK, click OK, and we'll shut out our gradient map. Now immediately you can see that we now have some colors that represent the skin. It's not working as well as it does. It's over the entire photograph, and 2, it's not mapping properly to the image. It's not working properly with the image. So what we need to do now is change our blending mode from normal. As you can see here at the top, we have our blending mode. Do the click down, and we're going to come down to color. Second one up from the bottom. Click color. And immediately you can see that the color has now become more realistic and maps much better to the actual image itself. The problem is it's over the entire image, and we don't want that. We just want it on the skin tones. So we're going back to our layer now. In fact, let's make this easier. Instead of this being called gradient map, let's change this name to skin tones. Right, so we now know that this layer is operating our skin tones. With your layer mask here, as you can see, by default the layer mask is set to white, and white will reveal everything that it is in the image. What we want to do is we want to conceal everything that's in the image and just reveal the parts we want to do. So we need to change this from a white layer mask to a black layer mask. Very simple. Hold down Control and I. And now you can see it's changed to a black layer mask, and nothing is showing on the image itself because everything is masked out. So what we need to do now is to use our layer mask to show the skin. So we're going to use a brush tool. So B on your keyboard to bring up your brush tool. And now we have quite a soft edge brush, but it's entirely up to you what size brush you want to use. So we've got our brush tool. Because we have a black layer mask, we want our foreground color to be white. If we want to show things through, whatever our color our mask is, we need the opposite here. So with white on our brush settings and black on our layer mask, I'm now going to start to mask in the skin. Now this is something you can take a lot of time doing. You can take much more time than I'm going to. I'm just going to whiz through this so that we're not spending all the time watching me paint this through. Okay, so I've roughly masked that through. You can take as much time as you like. There's a couple of areas here where I've gone onto the Blouse collar, but if you just press X on your keyboard and switch your palette back to black, you can just very gently just mask those back out. Beauty of this technique as well is that it's non-destructive. You can go backwards and forwards because you have layer masks. At any point during this technique, we can come backwards and forwards to get the effect that we're looking for and to mask out the areas that we don't want coloured. Okay, so there is our skin colour. Now, at this point, we can do some more adjustments. We can come back to our gradient map here, and we can start to move these points to lighten or darken the various tones and shades. Okay, for now I'm just going to leave it like that. So we're going to click OK, get rid of our gradient map. Let's go full screen. Now we're getting a fairly realistic skin colour. It may be a little bit too pink, it may be a little bit too orange, but we can adjust this further along. As I said, we can always go back to our gradient map and adjust those different parts. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to start to add colour to other areas. As you can see, I've left the lips as black and white so far, and the hair. All we've really done is the skin. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to show you how you can put colour into different areas. Let's start with the lips. Come down to your adjustment layer again, and this time we're going to add a hue and saturation adjustment level. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on Colorize. If we click on Colourise here, that's now going to colorise the entire image. And what I want to do is try and find a colour that would work for the lips here. So we're looking in the reds. I'm going to bring the saturation up to start to get a reddy tone that would possibly work for the lips. Now I've boosted the saturation a little bit there, and I've lightened it up a bit, and we're in the reds here. We can go further down into the reds to make it slightly, I think, about there. And again, all of these things can be adjusted as we go along. So let's get rid of that. And once again, the hue and saturation level layer has affected the entire image. So we want to do the same technique we used last time. On our layer mask here, we want to hide everything rather than reveal. So we want to change from a white layer mask to a black layer mask. Control and I, and now we're back to our original image. Now, exactly the same technique. We take our brush tool. I'm going to make the brush tool slightly smaller, and we've got a black layer mask, so we've got white as our foreground color. If you want to switch these between black and white, a quick way is just press X on your keyboard, and that will toggle between the black and the white. So, with the brush set on white and the layer mask on black, let's just gently painting the lips. There we go. And actually, I think that actually looks quite realistic. If we wanted to change the colors, you could double click again on your hue and saturation level there, and you could change the colors of the lips. So let's go about there. And again, I think that looks fairly realistic. And again, now we've added the color into the lips, it's made the skin look less orange. It's starting to make it look more realistic. Next thing we want to do, let's do the hair. So we're going to do exactly the same again. We're going to give another adjustment layer, and we're going to do another hue and saturation level layer. So we've got another hue and saturation layer up now, and let's name that as hair, so we know what everything is. While we're at it, let's rename that one as lips. Okay, so back onto our layer that we've named hair. Now, looking at this, her hair looks jet black. It's very unlikely to have been jet black. My hair, before it started to go grey, was quite a dark brown. So we're going to be looking for quite a dark brown colour. So again, we're going to click Colorize. And straight away, we're actually into quite a brown tone. Let's try just moving the saturation a little bit. Possibly somewhere like that. Let's up the saturation and darken it down a touch, I think. Somewhere like there. That's a fairly realistic looking brown colour. But again, we've got the same problem we've had before. The entire image is coloured in brown because we have the white mask, so we're going to invert the mask, Control and I. And now we're back to our original looking image, and we're going to use the white brush to unmask the areas that we want to do. So let's just roughly paint over here. And again, I'm going much quicker than I would normally. This really is just to give us the quick idea. I'm changing the size of the brush using the square brackets key. Got a little bit of overspill there, so X on the keyboard brings us back to black, and we can just hide those bits out there. Okay. So let's just go back to our original black and white image. And where we've got to now. So you can see already this is starting to make a real difference. Let's come out to a full size image. And you can see now that's starting to look a lot more realistic. Let's do same technique for the blouse here. Now I have no clue as to what colour this blouse was in the original image. It could be yellow, it could be a light green, it could be pink, it could be light blue. So really this is the point where you're going to have to make a decision as to what colour you think that is. Personally, I think it was possibly a light blue. So I'm going to go with that. So we're going to use exactly the same technique again. Bring in a hue and saturation level. Hue and saturation layer. Click Colorize. And let's pick a blue that we think would work with this top. But we've got the beautiful thing of we can just go along the colours, scrolling along the hue. It could well have been that green. It could have been that yellow. Let's come across and I'm going to go with that colour. Let's try boosting the saturation a little and playing around with the lightness. Okay, I'm going to say there. And again, as I said before, all of this is non-destructive. We can go back time again. I'll show you that in a second. So let's click that out. Again, we've got to invert our layer mask. So let's change this to blouse. Back on layer mask, Control and I. And now we're going to just paint in with our brush tool and our white foreground colour just the area that is the blouse. Okay, and because this is on its own separate layer, I've made a few errors here, so let's just tidy that up by reversing the colour back to the palette colour back to black, and we just clean up those edges where I've slightly gone over onto the skin there. And as I said, this is brilliant because this is non-destructive and you have a lot of options. So let's say, for example, I like that. I think the blue looks quite realistic. But if we wanted to change the colour of the blouse, if we just click on our hue and saturation level now, you can see now that the hue is on 190. So that's the colour I chose there. But we can, if we scroll, we can now change the colour of the blouse all the way through the spectrum. And a lot of them look realistic. A lot of them work really, really well. I noticed here, what were we at? 190 when we started. That's where we started. I noticed just then, as we scrolled along, I think that works better. So I'm going to leave it there. So I've actually changed, it's still the blue, but I've changed the hue of it slightly from where we originally started. So there we go. That's the basic technique of how you do it. And as you can see now, we've got to a stage now where we have the skin, the hair, and the clothing colorized, and you can keep going with this. Let's just show you an example of something I've just noticed, that we have areas of skin. We have areas of skin on the arm that has not been worked on yet. So if we just go back to our skin tones layer and click on the mask, we could fix that. As you can see, the technique works really, really well. Let's do a couple more. I'm just going to whiz through and do a couple more. I'm going to use the same technique to do the eyes and the necklace here and the bracelet around there. So let me just do those quickly. Hue and saturation. Eyes. Just zoom in on the image here. And again, we're looking for, so colorize, and we're looking for a brown. Reverse the mask. And again, if you think that's too brown or too saturated, just knock a bit of the saturation down, darken down a touch. That's the eyes done. Let's do something with the necklace. Zoom in on the necklace. Let's go hog wild. Colorize again. Let's go for a green. Something like that. Control I. Bring out our brush tool. Fairly sure that my grandmother didn't have real emeralds, but going by the time that this image was done, I think that looks fairly good. And again, I can see where I'm close up, there's a couple of areas I missed on the blouse. So go back to our blouse layer. Just fill in very, very lightly there. Final one, just to complete this, we've got this band around her arm there. Very stylish. Let's make that gold. Colorize again. Orangey yellow is what we're looking for. Something like that. Darken out our mask. And we'll colour it in as well. So let's bring this to full screen. There we go. what I'm going to do is create what's called a stamp layer, which is a copy of all of the layers we've done on here. So if you press Shift, Control, Alt and E at the top now, let's turn all these layers off. We now have a copy of all the things we've done there. So let's hold down Alt and click on the bottom. That's where our image started before we started to colorize. That's where we've got to. Now, again, as I said, you can take as much time as you like doing these and be a lot more careful than I have. But that is the basic technique for doing a really realistic colorization of a black and white image. I hope this has been helpful. If you've got any techniques that I haven't included that you've found for colorizing images, please leave them in the comments below. Let me know what techniques you use. None of these things are set in stone. They're all for us to share the information between us. So for now, I'm Dave Vickers. This is The Photo Show. Thanks for watching. See you next time.